Love music, live sport with Alex Horsburgh on Rock Sport Radio.
So, Monday afternoon, and it's the big match-up again, and this time it's Speedway, and we speak to our Speedway expert, Derek Smith. Derek, it's nice to talk to you, and we're going to speak about the Glasgow Tigers. You're going to compare and contrast two eras of one of Scotland's premier Speedway teams.
Yes, indeed, Alec. Thanks for allowing me to do this, and you did give me a bit of a challenge, Alex, to rack my brain and search into the Tigers' history. But I've come up, I think, with a couple of successful teams over the Tigers' history to do a contrast and compare. And against a backdrop, Alex, the Tigers were born in 1946, and I started watching the Tigers way back in the 70s. And before I started watching the Tigers, we had won nothing. And for the first 20-odd years of my watching the Tigers, we had won nothing. But nothing of note at a national level. But when the Tigers moved to Glasgow's Shawfield Stadium, with the Speedway team moving in as Clyde Football Club moved out, that was in 1987, I think it's fair to say that there was some added professionalism. Crowds grew at that point, and there was an uplift generally in capability around the club. And if I make a convenient excuse of winning something called the National Trophy in 1990, which was a tournament which was never ever restaged again, then I'm delighted to say that the holy grail of winning a league title did come the Tigers' way in 1993, and that would be the first team I would like to talk about, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about some of the celebs, the key players in that team.
Well, back in '93, the promotion at the time of the Tigers had a big challenge on their hands, because at the end of the 1992 season, we saw the retiral of an absolute legend of the Glasgow Tigers team, Steve Lawson, a Cumbrian who had joined the team way back in 1977. So Steve had served the club loyally for 16 seasons, and he was literally one of the best riders in the second division of Speedway throughout the 80s. And Steve hung up his racing boots at the end of 1992 and left a big role to fill. And the Tigers put together an interesting team. And when I look back now, all of these riders, of course, I can think of their achievements in the sport, and a lot of them went on to be very successful speedway riders indeed. But at that time, there was some unknown quantity in the side. So the Tigers retained the services of Shane Bowes, who was a young Australian rider who came over to the UK in '89 and linked up with Glasgow in '89, and we saw him progress over that 3 or 4 year period. And Shane was given the task of leading the team into the '93 season. He missed the final couple of months of the season due to an arm and a wrist injury, which curtailed his season. But in the early months of '93, Shane very much played a big role in taking the Tigers towards silverware. There was another Australian in the side, a second one, Mick Powell, who was very much a crowd pleaser, and he, I think it's fair to say, recorded his best season in the sport, up to that point at least, in '93, in the colours of Tigers, and he really adapted to the Shawfield circuit, and he made Tigers fans will fondly remember Mick Powell's dives into the third bend at Shawfield, and he made up so much ground on so many of the opposition riders, and he was a really gritty performer, was Mick Powell. Perhaps the standout of that '93 season was a Hungarian international. There was a Hungarian touring side had come to Glasgow the year before, and he wasn't the top scorer for the Hungarians in that meeting, but the Glasgow promotion took the opportunity to sign a rider called Robert Naj. And Robert did ride for the Tigers in the '92 season and returned to the side in '93. And in that season, he was an absolute standout. The mighty Magyar, as the Tigers fans fondly recall him. And he had entered Tigers folklore, in fact, in the debut season in '92, by becoming the first Glasgow rider ever to lift the League Riders title, which was at Coventry in '92. And that was a bit of a sensation around the club at the time. But he had an absolutely storming 1993 season for the Tigers, and at the end of the season he was the second highest point scorer in the entire division, and only headed by a young, at that time, Jason Crump, who was a future 3 times World Speedway champion. And Robert Nash, his dominance was such, Alec, that he only failed to hit double-figure scores for the Tigers in just 6 or so out of almost 60 meetings that season. And he was a big hero for the Tigers.
A star-studded team, no doubt about it. We always ask our big matchup experts to give each team a mark out of 10. So this early 90s Tigers team that you're talking about, marks out of 10 for them as a team.
I would need to give them a 9. I would need to give them a 9.
Okay, well, we're going to match them up against a team from the 21st century. And we'll do that with the Glasgow Tigers. Derek Smith coming next on the Big Matchup.
Love music, live sport. This is Rock Sport Radio.
Speedway featured this week, and we've got Derek Smith from our Tapes Up programme talking about the Glasgow Tigers team of 1993, and they are going to be matched against who, Derek?
Well, I could have made a case, Alex, for matching them against the team of 94, because the Glasgow side, who won the League and Cup double in 93, with a few changes, retained the League and Cup the very next season, which was a real purple patch for the club. However, I'm going to pick out the last Tiger side to lift the league title, which was in 2011, so a little bit more recently.
Yeah.
If the 93 side, Alec, they were labelled, they were billed as pre-season favourites, and thankfully managed to live up for that. If that was the case in 93, it was far from the case in 2011. And the Tigers, the team that we pieced together in 2011 was very much, we had a couple of riders at the top of the team who were in the downward part of their careers. They had a long, distinguished career, and their final few seasons in Speedway were ahead of them. And at the bottom end of the team, we had a couple of novice riders. We had a 16-year-old Australian Nick Morris, and in the middle order of the team, we had a couple of, I think it's fair to say, journeyman Speedway riders. A couple of riders who, yes, were experienced, but they hadn't pulled up any trees in particular in their careers, and it was a huge surprise that season. The Tigers, by this time, had moved to their current home circuit in Ashfield, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of Tigers fans were pleasantly surprised in 2011, because without any expectation whatsoever, the team absolutely strolled the Premier League in 2011, Alec.
So this team, obviously, fans' favourites.
Yeah, well, the team was led, I mentioned a couple of older hands, the team was led by James Greaves, who I mentioned in part one, who in 1993 was fulfilling his first full season in British Speedway riding for Glasgow. And here he was, all these years later, 2011, coming towards the end of his career. James retired from the sport at the end of 2013. Alongside James in the team was a rider called Joe Screen, who was a 2 times British champion, a former World Under-21 champion, and he'd been a routine competitor for a number of seasons at the top of the sport in the Grand Prix series. And Joe, too, was beginning, he was the latter part of his career. So with Joe and James at the top of the team, I mentioned Nick Morris earlier, 16-year-old Australian. Tigers had led the chase for his signature the season before. As soon as he celebrated his 16th birthday, he was into the team proper, and we watched him develop, and he's gone on to be an international for Australia. And we had a couple of riders, Theo Piper, who's one of the very few Dutch riders in the sport. He had previously had a few seasons with Edinburgh and Berwick, and he arrived at Ashfield and had a bit of a standout season and became a crowd favourite. And we also had Michael Rakowski, one of the very few Polish riders to have raced for the Tigers, and he was a big fan's favourite too in the middle order of the side, Alex.
So, we're going to match them up, this team of 93 against this team of 2011. We put them in a kind of virtual speedway track, I guess, and it's Glasgow versus Glasgow. First of all, before we ask you who would win that matchup, marks out of 10 for the 2011 team.
I think marks out of 10, if you were to compare, in Speedway, we tried to compare rider by rider to try and give a sense of which team might be stronger. And I think undoubtedly the 93 team was stronger, but I think the success that the 2011 side brought to the club, as I mentioned earlier, was such a surprise. It certainly was to me that they're probably due a few bonus points for the pleasure element. But out of 10, I would give the 2011 side 8.
Okay, so we go head to head with this fantasy Speedway meeting. Who would win, Glasgow 2011 or Glasgow Tigers 1993?
Well, I think, again, the context is important in settling this. And your 93 side were labelled as favourites. The 2011 side were anything but. Both teams in those respective years easily and comfortably won their league title with points to spare. But I think to come down on the side of one of those sides, I've got to go for the 93 side, Alec, because quite frankly they were the first team in the club's history to break what was at that point a 50-year period of never having won anything of any note. So the 93 side wins the big matchup for me, Alec.
Okay, well, Glasgow Tigers fans, you can discuss that amongst yourselves. We'll do another Speedway big matchup soon, but for the moment, Derek, all the best, and of course we can catch you on a Sunday night now.
Yes, indeed, back on the 7th and looking forward to it.
Thanks very much for that, Derek.
Thank you, Alec.
Love music, live sport with Alex Horsburgh on Rock Sport Radio.